Are there questions?
In field theory, so the definition of one PR diagram is when we cut one line, it gets separated into diagrams.
Yes.
But here it is not necessary.
So you can define one PR diagram that way. Exactly, I mean,
If we glue two punctures of the same,
that's not one PR.
that is not one.
That's one PR in field theory, right? It will be one PR here. So here also, exactly in the way you define one PR and one PR diagrams in field theory, you can do the same thing here. Okay? That when you cut a propagator, if it falls apart into two parts, that will be declared as one particle reducible. Otherwise, it is one particle irreducible. Right? So, field theory diagrams like these or these are all one particle irreducible diagrams, right? Even though we have actually, from the string theory perspective, we have glued two punctures on the same Riemann surface. So these will be considered as one particle irreducible even in string theory. There are questions?
So I had the impression that when you were discussing the three-point function,
Yes.
so you said there was a case with 3 ns functor and the case with 2 ns, so 1 ns and 2
Two Raman.
Raman. You don't have the other cases, like 3 Raman functor?
No, because the number of Raman punctures is always even, right? So you cannot have one Raman puncture or 3 Raman punctures, and the reason is essentially that the Raman puncture creates a Z2 branch cut, right? So that has to end somewhere. So if you have 2 Raman punctures, then the branch cut can go like this. But if you have 1 or 3 Raman punctures, then there is one Raman puncture which is left, whose branch cut has no place to end. And that's why you cannot define amplitudes with odd number of Raman punctures. And this of course fits in with the field theory intuition that we shouldn't have a vortex with odd number of orthogonals. Right? We always have orthogonals in even number. Okay, there it follows from Lorentz invariance. Here it's following from the Wahrscheinlich Z2. Yeah, Raman-Brownstein is a spinor, right? So that of course these are correlated. But I'm saying even if you didn't know that Raman-Brownstein is a spinor, then also just by the fact that it creates a branch cut, you can see that you cannot have odd number of orthogonals.
So all the solid lines we had in this section, and we had dotted lines and we had solid lines.
Yes.
Solid lines are not necessarily one PR.
Well, solid lines are necessarily one PR because, but solid lines are not necessarily, they can be one PI or one PR, right? Because the solid lines could come from diagrams like this part, right? Because this is obtained by gluing two objects, right? So this will be part of the solid line, or they could come from diagrams like these. Okay, so solid lines do not necessarily belong to either one PI or one PR category. The dotted lines are always one PI because they are the elementary vortices. Right? By definition, they cannot be one. Is this? It doesn't continue. Exactly. Yeah, the divergent part always corresponds to, in this language, some propagator going outside, right? Because if you think of the integration of the moduli space, that's the S going to infinity limit, right? Which is the degenerate region of the moduli space. Right? That's what causes the divergence. Okay? And these parts, okay, which you use to fill, by definition, do not contain any such contribution. All of those are included in diagrams like this. Is this yeah? Yeah, so this is the reason why this kind of just dividing the contributions into parts like this is useful because this tells us clearly where you can expect divergences. Are there other questions? Okay, so today's lecture and probably tomorrow's will be essentially to precisely contradict what I claimed here, that these do not contain a divergences. Okay, and we will see that these can contain potential divergences. Okay, even though there is no degeneration. And this is where the notion of spurious poles come in. Okay, so let me draw this figure again. So we have this PGMN, okay, whose base is the moduli space of genus J Riemann surface with m plus n punctures. Let me write it as Mn, okay, m ns punctures and n Raman punctures. And here you have the fiber direction, which is local coordinates and PCOs. So spurious poles by definition are any singularities, and you will see that all of them are poles, any singularities of omega p in PGMN which do not arise from degenerate Riemann surface. Okay, because all those which are from degenerate Riemann surface have already been isolated by reinterpreting in terms of finite dynamics. So these poles, these singularities can arise in principle inside the dotted region, which are perfectly regular regions in the moduli space, and can potentially make the elementary vortices of string theory divergent. So I'll begin with some simple examples. And as you will see that these spurious singularities will involve essentially the PCOs, the locations of the picture sending operators. These will not be sensitive to the choice of local coordinates. So the simplest example one can think of is volition of two PCOs. Because if you take x of Z1 times x of Z2 is singular. I call this chi, right? Chi of Z1 times Z2. Okay, you can easily check the OP with the expression for chi that I have given, and you will find that this OP is singular. This means that in the fiber direction, this is labeled by the definition of the PCOs, and in this fiber direction, whenever you go to a subspace when two of the PCOs are at the same point, that corresponds to a singularity of the corresponding omega. The integer will become singular. The integer, of course, after all, involves the correlation part. Second example, which also is of the is volition of PCO. Yes.
PCOs are dimension 0 operators. So
That's right, yes.
the singularity in the corresponding operator would be negative dimension, so I will not be the chromotype.
Yeah, there will be negative dimension, but the point is because you have the phi, right? So you take two product of two PCOs, it's in the picture number 2, right? And picture number 2, there are plenty of negative dimension of part certain arrays. Then you can easily check because usually minus 2, 5 for example is not first of all well usually 2, 5, right? One can check what the dimension of that is, and as you saw on top of that you can build states by acting with oscillators which can have arbitrary negative dimension. Right? So that's the reason why even though they have dimension 0, right, the product of two of these can have poles. Okay.
They would be in the homology.
Well, they may not be in the cohomology, but we are now trying to describe a general amplitude, right? Okay, then you want us to worry about total derivatives and so on.
For offset it would be.
Yeah, for offset it will certainly cause problem. For on cell, you have to worry about total derivatives and Puccio's collide. Okay, so to define the amplitude, it's not clear how to make it. I mean, if it's singular, right, then whether it vanishes at the end or not, that becomes an ambiguous question because then you have to first regulate and then worry about whether it vanishes. Other questions? Yeah, they appear in the definition of omega, right? Yeah, it could. I mean, in PGMA, right? The PCO locations can be anywhere on the Riemann surface, right? So, in particular, on this in this direction, there are subspaces in which the PCO location is on top of the body separator, and there, the integral becomes singular. So, omega p involves a product of vertex operators and PCOs, right? The correlation function involves a product of vertex operators and PCOs. So, the PCO location is on top of the vertex operator. You can check the OP, and typically it's a singular OP. Right? So, the omega p becomes singular. Right? So, there are subspaces of this, of PGMN, on which omega p becomes singular. Okay? And you can also see what the dimension of the subspace is. Collision of two PCOs means that it's one complex condition. Z1 has to be equal to Z2. That one complex condition, that's complex codimension 1 or real codimension 2. So, on a real codimension 2 subspace in this big space, omega p becomes that. Is that clear? We are giving one complex condition on all the parameters of PGMN. Right? That one complex condition here is either Z1 equal to Z2, but here it's the location of the PCO coincident to the on vertex operator, and that gives that.
As far as the on-shell amplitudes are concerned,
Yes.
the first one will really not be a problem because it is up to us to choose where do I put the PCOs, right?
Yeah, except that it's not completely up to us because you see that these parts are already fixed by lower order amplitude, right? So there are boundary conditions where the PCOs should be fixed, right? So you have to see, subject to those boundary conditions, if you can choose PCOs here, it is true that it's up to us here,
Okay.
right? But the boundaries are fixed, right? And given the boundary condition, we have to ask, is it possible to choose PCO locations over the full section, okay, so as to avoid singularities. Right? And in general, you will see that it may not always be possible. Okay, when you draw some geometric picture, it will become clear that typically you will always run into singularities.
Only 3 points are fixed by 6%. Other all integrated.
Yes.
So it will fall over one PCO.
No, but you are not moving the PCOs, right?
You saying that you can move it, can you move it in such a way that they never know?
Exactly. So the question is that we have singularities. See, what will the question that we have singularities on a codimension 2 subspace, right? Of PGMN. Okay. We have to choose a section or a over G integrate, right? Would we choose a section that doesn't integrate, that doesn't intersect that codimension 2 subspace? And that's a geometric question. Okay, you have to choose a section here to define your amplitude. And typically, if you have a codimension 2 subspace on which integrand is singular, it will intersect the section also on a codimension 2 subspace. Is that clear? Okay. Imagine that you have a big space of which a codimension 2 subspace is singular. Right? You draw some section. That section will intersect that codimension 2 subspace over a codimension 2 subspace. Right? Because it's basically two real conditions on the coordinates. Right? It will translate to two real conditions on the coordinates of the section.
So these are collections of codimension 2 subspaces.
Yes, collection of codimension 2 subspaces. Right? But take any one of them. Right? And a section will intersect typically over a codimension 2 subspace. Right? So it will intersect over many codimension 2 subspaces. Is this one clear? Okay. So as you said that you can choose the choice of PCO is up to us, but you have to make sure that it has the right factor. So you cannot just choose completely arbitrary. Right? So which means that the boundary conditions are fixed, and given these, you have to see if you can satisfy the appropriate factor. Right? Avoiding this codimension 2 subspace, singular subspaces. Okay, so now let me describe a more serious kind of spurious poles.
Does the second example mean that if we work with picture number 0, we will get this spurious singularity?
Yes, of course. If you take picture number 0, right, then you can show that if you take whenever two picture number 0 vertex operators come close, then effectively you get singularity which shouldn't be there.
But in the last class we saw that they arise when we consider degenerate surface.
Exactly.
But these are not from
Oh, yeah. So here the point is, if we take picture number 0 on shell vertex operators, then these singularities are not there. Okay, you can check that if you take on shell vertex operators of the form C bar C V, okay, where V is a matter primary of conformal matter primary. In fact, take NS sector C bar C to the minus 5 times V. So this is matter vertex operator of dimension 1/2. You can check that this is not singular. The I of Z is not singular. But if you take a generic vertex operator, it can still be on shell, but you could add to it QB on something, right? This is also, if you add to V, QB W, this is also on shell. This is also BRS invariant. But this one could have singularity when you bring chi outside. So for special kinds of the zero picture vertex, special kind of -1 picture vertex operator, you can get by, okay, by going to the zero picture without having a singularity when the PCOs are thought. But that is not always the case. Is this, yeah? Okay. Now the third kind of spurious pole, which do not appear in genus 0, these, as you can see, appear in any genus. The third kind of spurious poles appear from genus 1 onwards, and they come from some peculiarity of the xi eta phi correlated. This is where I need a space. Pardon? From G equal to 1 onwards. I will write down the xi eta phi correlation on the torus. But it can be easily generalized to a general genus J Riemann surface. In fact, if you remember Narayan's lecture, he did write down the general expression. Okay. What I am going to write down is a special case of that on the torus, but the structure is more or less identical. So what you want to calculate is a large Hilbert space correlation function. And there is a formula. Notice that I have one more size than equals. This is written in large Hilbert space. Okay, where I had told you earlier that the number of size is one more than the number of equals. Okay, that's when the thing is non-zero. And furthermore, because we have the relation that sum over 2k is 2 times g minus 1. G is a genus. So here it is 0. Okay, because we are working at g equal to 1. Okay, in general, this similar formula exists for this being equal to 2. Yes. So, these are the Jacobi theta functions. Because so this sum over I is the answer of possible x's.
For y you can do differently.
You want me to do something else for y? Well, I can do it, but I'll probably get confused by the end. So it's understood that this is running from 1 to n plus 1 and this is running from 1 to n. Because here the product is from 1 to n plus 1. So if you have not specified the limits, it runs out of everything. Pardon? Yeah, theta delta. So delta is a spin structure. Okay. So basically there are 4 spin structures, okay, which you can think of it as 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0 or 1, 1. Okay, or you will use other notation. Delta is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the 4 theta functions, 4 Jacobi theta functions. This sum is with sum, this product is over j. This is yj. This sum subtraction is yj. So you basically subtract 1 y at a time. I'll write this up. Okay, and then there will be the prime forms. E xy is theta 1 prime x minus y, theta 1 x minus y or theta 1 prime. So theta 1 is the Jacobi theta function which has a 0 at the 0 part. Okay, or in the notation where you write theta alpha beta, this is theta 1 1. So Exy basically goes as x minus y, goes as x minus y for x close to y. And you can easily verify that all the zeros and poles which are expected from the OP are encoded here. Okay, this encode, this for example, when xi and xi prime are equal, xi is formally, so it should have a 0. You see that there is a 0 here. Similarly, y prime equal, okay, there is a 0. When xi goes close to yj, there should be a pole, okay, which is here. And these are the singularities of these. This part, what is here, is necessary to ensure that these correlation functions have the right periodicity. For example, this ensures that this correlation function is periodic in the variable xi on the torus, periodic in the variable yi on the torus, okay, and has appropriate periodicity in the variable z. Those are not the idea, because on the torus they are different. Yeah, so that's why those things are not there. Right? On higher genus there will be also so. Yes.
Why is there some qk equals 0 in this case? Xi and eta also have some these are just background charge to manage.
Yeah, these are background charge. I am counting separately for phi and then xi. Right? So what I say is that in large Hilbert space, the number of xi minus number of beta is equal to 1. Right? And the phi charge should add up to 2g minus 1.
Until the 6 percent.
Yeah. So there are some nice properties of this, okay, which is not visible at all from this. Okay, and it took some work, took a while to actually prove all these properties. So the most important property is the following. Okay, without which this formula will not make much sense. So let's suppose that we apply the operator derivative operator on this correlation function in all the variables from 1 to n, okay, but not the last one. There is no derivative in I n plus 1, but apply some derivatives in all the other variables. Okay, at least one. Okay, in I less than equal to 1. So it looks like a very complicated function, right? I mean, this is very complicated already. I'm going to try to start applying derivatives. Obviously, it will be a very complicated function. But what one finds that this is independent of xn plus 1.
So you said ni is greater than or equal to 1?
Yes, that zero derivative is not allowed. Okay, you have to have at least one derivative. Okay? And the reason that I am taking one derivative is because I want to bring these operators into the small Hilbert space. Small Hilbert space doesn't contain Zart, right? So if you want to calculate correlation function in the small Hilbert space, you should apply derivatives. But you convert not all n plus 1 into small Hilbert space operators, but n of them are into small Hilbert space operators. And what is surprising is that this object turns out to be independent of xn plus 1. This is independent of xn plus 1. Okay, we'll take a derivative of this with respect to all the xi's. Okay, at least once from 1 to n. It's a complicated function of x1 to xn, right? And y. But what one can show is it's independent of xn plus 1. And this is essential for having an interpretation of this correlation function as the one in small Hilbert space.
But then,
Yes.
because the last one psi what is representing the zero.
Exactly. So this is saying that this is consistent because we know that one psi we need for absorbing the zero. Okay. So if we take derivatives of all the psis, the result should be zero. Okay. Which is not obvious from this formula. Okay. But nevertheless it is true because if we take derivatives with respect to all, if we apply a derivative operator on all the psis, okay, then we get a correlation function of the x's. In the large Hilbert space, this correlation function should vanish because there is nothing to absorb the xi0. Right? Last time I said that xi has a zero mode, which can be absorbed by inserting a specific xi. Okay? But because the zero mode is a constant, del xi will not absorb that zero. Okay? And this is a reflection of this. Okay? That when we take this, the result becomes independent of xn plus 1. So the idea is that we take this as the correlation function in the large Hilbert space, but our interest is in constructing correlation function in the small Hilbert space, which involves only the operators made of del xi and eta and utility phi's. And those are obtained by starting from this formula, taking the derivative with respect to all the xi's except the last one, and then the result becomes independent of the coordinate of the last one. So you can just drop it. Okay? So you can declare that the small Hilbert space correlation function of del xi's is obtained by starting with one extra xi inserted, taking the derivative with respect to all the other xi's, and then just ignoring the fact that you have inserted one extra xi. Okay? So what I will do is that I will denote this by prime to denote that this is the correlation function in the large Hilbert space. When you talk about correlation function in the small Hilbert space, I will not explicitly insert the xi xn. Okay, I will just not display it because the result is independent of the coordinate of xi xn plus 1. But small Hilbert space means that all the other xi's that will appear inside the correlation function will come with negatives. Okay, so that is how ambiguity.
Here, so it doesn't, this quantity doesn't depend on n plus 1.
Yes.
Similar logic, it doesn't depend on any of the xi.
No, it doesn't depend on xn plus 1 only when you take the derivative with all the other xi's.
Yeah, but I could just skip say x1.
Yes, because it's symmetric of course in all the x's. Right?
So all of them, when I look at one, what does it mean?
So that's in large Hilbert space. So what you do in a small Hilbert space, right? You have to see in a small Hilbert space when you calculate a correlation function. Okay? You don't see things like this. Okay? You will have equal number of xi's and etas. Okay? On all each of the xi's, you have a derivative. Okay? How do you get that correlation function from the formula that I have written? Okay? There are equal number of xi's and etas, right? So it doesn't make sense to use this formula apparently. Okay? So what you do is that you take that formula, that correlation function that you want to calculate, equal number of xi's and etas, or but each xi having a derivative, insert one more xi at some arbitrary point, xi of x naught, and use this formula to calculate it. And this relation tells us that the final result will not depend on x naught. Is this clear? Okay. Imagine, let me give an example. Suppose you want to calculate del xi of x, theta of y in the small Hilbert space. Okay, so no prime. Okay. How do you calculate this given this formula? Okay. So you write this as I of x naught del xi of x theta of y prime. Okay. Then we will write this as del x of xi of x naught xi of x theta of prime chi. Okay. So this is del del x of, well, if you want me to write it, I can write it, but it is a read out from it. Right? To read out from this formula. So that's how we calculate something like this on the small equations. Is this clear? Okay, that's the way you are supposed to make use of this formula.
Although in this formula all the x's are in somewhat symmetric footing, when I use that, then x naught is somewhat special footing, but it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah, this is symmetric, but you apply, you put insert this x naught. Okay? And you can use a convention that this is a sign convention that whatever x psi of x naught you use, you will use always in the front to extend length. Okay? Because every time you extend there is a minus sign, right? So you can use the convention that it will allow the extend.
Why
Pardon?
it's x0 which are
Yes.
if it keeps PCA
No, because this is now independent of the x0, right? This is independent of x0. That's the statement. So there is no singularity when x0 does anything. Okay? Xi of x0 is needed for soaking of the 0. Is this clear? So this tells you how to calculate the xi in the phi correlation function. But now you see that there is a problem because all the singularities that are implied by OP are contained here. But there are also possible singularities when this vanishes. Okay, the theta function which is appearing in the denominator has zeros. And whenever this vanishes, you have a singularity. So these are what are called spurious poles. Okay, these are in fact the non-trivial kind of spurious poles. Okay, the trivial ones are the collisions of PCOs and collision of PCO cortex operator. So zeros of these are spurious poles.
Sine functions also contribute.
Well, but these are similar to OP. Whatever these contribute, right, are already contained in OP, which are already taken care of, right? For PCOs collide, there are singularities. So those are of course implied by these transforms. So this do not give anything other than what OP have already told. Right? These give you something new, right? Which is totally unexpected. It happens somewhere in the middle of the moduli space, right? Where nothing is colliding with anything. Right? Nevertheless, you find that there is a singularity. And you can see that these are also complex codimension 1 or real codimension 2, right? Because they are complex variables. So-
only for one spin structure, right?
Pardon?
Only for one spin structure it will happen. Oh no, maybe not.
No, because I mean you can shift by half or yeah. So it can happen for all spin structures. It depends on what range these values take. So these also happen for on surfaces of codimension 2, real codimension 2, right? Because vanishing of the theta gives a condition on the argument, right? A complex equation. This argument has to have some specific value, okay? Either 0 or half or tau by 2 or 1 plus tau by 2. And that means that there are two real conditions on the various variables. Those conditions now depend non-trivially on the locations of the operators as well as the moduli. Because where it vanishes also depends on actually the moduli of the events. Tau. Right? Some zeros of some of the theta functions are at tau by 2 or 1 plus tau by 2. So these zeros involve non-trivially the locations of the PCOs and the moduli. And the puncture location, because punctures of course also carry e to the minus 5. Okay. So So these are even very hard to locate where they are. Right? You have to really be careful, and I mean you cannot just geometrical picture it as the solutions of operators. But one unifying feature of all these previous poles is that all of them occur on codimension 2 subspaces, real codimension 2 subspaces of each area. Okay, that's what we are going to make use of.
The function vanishing.
Yes.
That, how are you saying that it is also a dimension?
Because theta function vanishes when the argument takes some specific value. Okay? For example, theta 1 1 vanishes at z equal to 0. Right? So that this has to be 0, right? Which is one complex equation. Right? So two real conditions, right? Or z equal to half, right? Or z equal to tau by 2, right? Which is still one complex equation which is two real equation. So that's why we are all about.
Can you repeat why it is previous? Because apart from x not, everything is.
Why is that?
Can you repeat why this is previous? Because I mean, only x not is unphysical, but other x's or x in plus one.
No, these are spurious because they are not implied by OPs. If I had just given you this correlation, this one, right? You could have looked at this and figured out certain singularities of this from the operator. When any of the xi's come close to y, when some of the zk's go near each other, there has to be some singularity. Those are all captured here. Okay, the fact that when x goes close to y, there should be a pole, that's here. Exi, yj vanishes, right? When x goes to xi goes to yj. These capture the appropriate operator product singularities when the z's come close to each other. These are not anticipated by any operator product.
But these are physical. I mean, definition they are previous, but
Well, they are. Meaning, it depends on what is your definition of being physical. Right? These are there in the interior of the moduli space. Okay? These are singularities of omega p inside each element.
The idea of these poles you don't get from physical.
Pardon?
The idea of these poles that these poles might be there, that you don't get from a physical.
Not from field theoretic interpretation, no. Not from field theoretic interpretation. The field theoretic interpretation only gives to near degeneration. Okay? But there is a worksheet understanding of all the spurious poles that I have discussed. Okay, so let me just say it, but we are not going to use it. Okay, because we are not starting from the worksheet and again supersymmetric worksheet theory and gauge fix. Okay? But if you did it, there is an interpretation of where these spurious poles are coming from. And what one finds at each of these spurious poles Now, let me say geometrically apart these fields. So, as I have been telling you, all the picture taking operators are coming because we have started with the worksheet supersymmetric theory, okay, the local supersymmetry invariant theory, and we have gauge fix. So, we have gauge fix the local supersymmetry to fix the gravity laws at delta function singularities, and then you have integrated out all the formulae. Now, if it so happens that the gauge fixing is not fixing the gauge completely, then we expect some problems. Okay? An analogy of this is on the sphere, right? An ordinary bosonic string theory on the sphere. When you gauge fix, okay, you have three gauge symmetries which are unfixed. Right? Those are the conformal Killing vectors of the sphere. Right? Gauge fixing G alpha beta equal to delta alpha beta doesn't fix all the symmetries, right? And that's why they show up as C0 modes. Okay, that's why you have 0 modes of the C host, and they cause 0 of the original part. Right? If you don't insert the extra C's, you get zeros. So whenever you have your gauge fixing is not complete, okay, you expect that in ordinary case you should get zeros. Why do you get zeros? Because you are dividing by the volume of the gauge group, right? And the volume of the gauge group becomes infinite. Okay, that's the SL2R volume, okay, or SL2C volume, and that's what is causing the zero. Here the situation is opposite. Here, if the gauge fixing doesn't fix the gauge completely, what you get is not zero but infinite. Okay? Because you are fixing a formal expecting. Okay? So instead of dividing by the volume, okay, you are actually multiplying by the volume, which shows up in the gauge independent formulation as a zero mode of gamma. And the gamma, once gamma zero develops a zero mode, the integration over that zero mode gives you infinity because it's a bosonic zero. And that is the origin of these divergences, and you can show that whenever the condition for a spurious singularity is satisfied, gamma develops a zero. Okay. The simplest one to understand is when two picture changing operators collide. Okay. What is the meaning of when two picture changing operators collide? This means that you are supposed to fix the gravity laws, okay, by putting certain conditions, right? And the location of the picture changing operator is essentially the condition that the gravity law must vanish at that point. Okay, that's how the picture changing operator. So this is the interpretation of why the picture changing operator is inserted. So if you insert the picture changing operators at say k different places, okay, that means that you are gauge fixing the gravity law by reminding that it should vanish at those k different points. Now if those two of those points are the same, then you are putting redundant condition, right? The gravity law is not vanishing at distinct points, the gravity law is being forced to vanish at the same point, right? So the same condition you are applying twice. So that means that's not enough to fix the gauge. That's the simplest way to see why when two picture changing operators collide, you expect a singularity. These are more complicated, but what can show that even when each of these spurious poles, whenever the denominator vanishes, you can show that that reflects the fact that the gravity law or the gamma develops a zero. Singularities. Okay, but for us this is not going to be important. Okay, for us the only issue is that there are these spurious poles and how to deal with it. So how to integrate?
Some of these operators themselves were kind of corresponded to zero gamma, right?
Yes, that's right.
So this developed zero mode means two zeros coincided. That's what we mean.
Oh, what happens is that if you imagine that you have insert these operators and then you insert another gamma of Z. Okay, besides all of these operators. Okay. And you will find that this one has develops a zero. Okay, so there is a solution for gamma of Z, which so basically there is one singular solution for gamma of Z whenever this happens. Okay, it's exactly like the C, right? That you soak up the C zero modes by inserting C, right? What it means is that you demand that the C vanishes at those points, right? That's where you remove the C zero modes. Okay, once you say that C is not an arbitrary conformal killing vector, but it's a killing vector, but it's a vector field, but it has to vanish at those 3 points. Then you find there is no solution to a conformal killing equation. right? So similarly here, once you have inserted this, right, you are imposing certain singularity structure on the gammas, right? Gamma has certain zeros, certain poles, and so on. And now the question is, subject to this condition, is there a non-singular wave function for gamma? Okay, and you will find that when this condition for spurious poles are satisfied, you find there is a non-singular wave function for the gamma. With these boundary conditions, and it's the integration now, so that means there is a gamma 0 node now, and the integration over the gamma 0 node causes the divergence. So these operators you think of as providing some boundary condition on the gammas, right? Some certain singularity structure on the gammas.
And this integration is over the programmation to subspace.
Which integration?
The divergence.
Yeah. Yeah. So this divergence means there is a 0.
This is the volume of the surface.
Yeah, this is the volume of the gamma 0. So that is not, see, that's just the integration over the gamma field, right?
Yeah.
That's what is causing divergence. It happens when these satisfy codimension 2 condition. See, it's exactly like if you have inserted 3 C's on the sphere, right? If 2 of them are at the same point, you get a 0. Right? Why are you getting 0? Because you have not fixed the gauge completely. Right? You fix the gauge by requiring the C's has to vanish as Z1, Z2. But if Z1 and Z2 are the same, then the condition that you are putting on C is not strong enough for it to give a non-zero answer. Okay, C still has a 0. Right? And that's what makes this vanish. So it's the same thing here. That by inserting these operators, you have required that gamma has certain singularities. But the question is, are those singularities and zeros, whatever it may be, are those constraints enough to say that gamma has no zero on the plane? Okay, and what you find is that when the spurious pole condition is satisfied, gamma has a zero. Okay, and then the gamma integral in the path integral makes it divergent. And that happens when over in this codimension 2 subspace. That's true for C's also, right? If you have CZ1, CZ2, CZ3, right? Over a codimension 2 subspace, when Z1 and Z2 are equal, you get a 0. Okay, but as I said, none of these, this is the physical interpretation of where it comes from, none of this is going to be important for defining the quadratic because this is after all what the spurious poles are, right? These 3 kinds of spurious poles. And our problem is how to integrate omega into the spurious poles. Okay, irrespective of what the spurious poles.
I can introduce a delta function.
What?
I can introduce delta gamma or something.
Delta gamma is like e to the minus 5. Right? So those we have already introduced here. In field theory. Yeah, I think even in field theory, in supersymmetric field theory, if you don't fix the gauge completely, you will probably find superposed zero modes. Right? And because this is after all you can think of this as a field theory. Okay, field theory I don't know. You need local gauge invariance, right, which is formula. In supergravity you will certainly have problems of this kind. And in normal gauge theories, right, you may get zeros, but not infinites. Okay, so let's look at it somewhat geometrically. Okay, I'll have to draw a figure. Okay, I'll try to make it as simple as possible, but it will look a little more complicated than what we have been drawing so far. So now I'm going to draw a free GMN again. Okay, but the base now I'll represent as a 2-dimensional subspace. 2-dimensional space. And a fiber as a 1-dimensional fiber labeled by the location of one of the picture changing components. Okay, this is just for simplification. Because to draw a figure, one has to, you cannot draw it any more than 3 dimensional figure. Okay. And so this is PGMN. And the spurious pole is a codimensional 2 subspace in this PGMN. Okay. So PGMN as I have drawn is 3 dimensional. Okay. So a spurious pole will correspond to a 1 dimensional curve passing through this. Okay. Take some 1 dimensional curve. Okay. And a section now is something that will go like this. Right? So let's take a section. Correctly. Maybe let to draw a plain section, that will make it clearer, but it doesn't have to be plain. So let us just for simplicity draw something that is parallel to this axis. Okay, think of this as a parallel to the PGMN. And PGMN is something that, the spurious pole, let me use a different color chalk for you. Like this, then it pierces through and comes out like this.
How do you know it's not parallel?
Pardon?
Maybe parallel also.
Well, it could be, but that requires that you have to be extremely lucky, right? Because in general, the spurious pole, as you have seen, depends in a complicated way on the moduli and the location for the PCOs, right? So it doesn't have a simple structure that is parallel to this. If it's parallel to this, it's good enough. It's well and good, you don't have to do anything, right? But in general, that's not the case.
No, I think I'm from your what's it touches it and then for some time it goes parallel.
Well, that's a very special case. Yeah, it can happen. But it doesn't matter. What analysis will cover that also. Okay. As long as it doesn't lie on the surface, okay, which is a very strange situation. Right? This is the generic situation, right? If it's parallel, the choice of section is always up to you, right? You can always fill the section so that it intersects. Okay, so this is the generic situation that you have to deal. So here there is as you can see, there is a problem because the integrand, when you try to integrate it over this section, is going to blow up here. Okay, because there is a hole. So the question is how to choose a section so that we avoid the spurious. And you can see that it's not really possible in the generic situation to choose a section that avoids the spurious, right? Because you have to go from one side to the other, like you cannot just avoid the spurious. So what we'll do is something else. We'll choose a section in a somewhat strange way. So let's cut out some disc on this surface where the spurious pole intersects this section. Here it's a 0 dimensional point, right? On this 2 dimensional half space is 4 dimensional 2, so it's a point at which this curve intersects. So cut out a disc on this surface around that point, and then go horizontally down or down. Go sufficiently far up. Then okay. So our section that we'll be choosing is now this part, everything that is outside this disc. Then the surface of the cylinder. So you consider it's not strictly a section because it's going vertically up. And then this this. Pardon?
Sync touches the card.
Yeah, it still touches the card, but it touches it as it's going vertically up. Right? That's important. Okay, it has to. So you choose the medium. So is this picture clear? Right? So we have a two-dimensional plane, and there is a point here where the spurious pole is spurious singularity is intersecting the plane. Right? So you cut out, draw a circle around that point. Okay? It doesn't have the circle. Draw some card around the circle. Then erect the cylinder vertically. Okay? And fill it here. Okay? And make sure that it goes sufficiently high up, so the spurious pole has gone out of the substance. Is this clear? Okay, this will fail only if it is vertically up. Right? If this is vertically up, but that's not the situation ever, because if the spurious pole is like this, that means what? That the location of the spurious pole is independent of Z1. Right? For all Z1 it exists. For all the spurious poles that we have seen, depends on some PCO location. Right? The spurious pole comes because of the PCOs. Right? Either the PCOs are colliding, or the PCO is colliding with the cortex or quarter, or this where things depend on the PCO locations. So it always depends on some PCO location. And that PCO is what I call Z1.
You could also take a different section.
Pardon?
You could also take a different section.
Yeah, you could take a different section, but what I'm saying is that if this had been vertically up,
Yeah, so you choose a different section, then it is not vertically up, right?
no. Suppose this yellow card was vertically up, like this.
Yeah.
Right? Then it's not possible to cut it by vertical section. See, what I want to do is that I want to cut the spurious pole by a vertical segment along which Z1 is very keeping the motor like this.
Vertical with respect to the section, right?
No, not vertical with respect to the section. Vertical means only along the fiber direction. There is one tangent vector which is purely along the fiber direction. Right? So this surface has that feature. Right? That one of the tangent vectors of this surface is purely along the fiber direction. Okay, that is going to be important. That will not happen if this is going vertically down.
And you do not need a connection for this break. You
Do not need it?
You do not need a connection on this condenser to break up this.
No, because the point is that the changing Z1, keeping the moduli fixed is a well defined concept. Okay? Changing the moduli keeping Z1 fixed is not a well defined concept. But you can certainly keep the moduli fixed and change Z1. Right? You can move in the fiber direction at a fixed value of the base, point in the base. Right? The other way is not possible. There is no infinity. Or that you need a connection.
That is just defining if I say
Yeah, in this case not F5, that's the location of the PCO. Okay? We are not changing local coordinates, we are just changing the PCO location. Now it's not clear at this stage it helps. Right? So I have to show that it helps in defining the amplitude.
The cylinder is now part of a section.
Yes, the cylinder is part of the integration variable. So the full integral, so if you call this region S1, these are S2, and the cylinder as C, right? Then the full integration, so it's not general, it's not a section anymore. Okay? Because sections don't go vertically up. Okay? But it's some subspace of PGMN, right? And I have defined the omega P of PGMN. So I can certainly integrate the omega P over this. Right? As long as you can avoid the as long as you can show that the spurious singularities don't bother us, we can certainly integrate omega P GMN, omega GMN on. So let me just say that we have to integrate over S1 plus S2 plus C plus S. You come like this, go up, and then fill up. In this case, this is closed. Yes.
But the cylinder will force the pole.
Yes, yes. So that we have to deal with. Okay, I am going to tell you how to deal with this. So the geometric picture that I have drawn hasn't solved the problem, right? It has just transferred the problem into the cylinder. Okay, so I have to now specify, I have to now say how we deal with the spurious pole on the cylinder. Is this clear? Okay. So in this way, there is no problem in defining the integrals on S1 and S2, right? Because they are no different and spurious. The possible problem is over the cylinder. So let's call this base B. Okay, or maybe it's projection. It's projection in MGMN. Okay, so we characterize this. So let's call this. This is B prime, and what should I call this? Let's call it some B delta. This is the projection on the base. So you are just cylinder is a vertical segment erected over B delta, which is on the base.
Can you explain once more why you have drawn that extra line?
Which extra line? This one?
No. The MGN originally had this one line, MGN and PTN, right?
MGN had
two-dimensional graph.
Well, I was drawing it in two-dimensional graph, but of course MGN is high. I mean 6G minus 6 plus 2M plus 2N dimensional, right? So I have drawn it here as two-dimensional because I have to show. Because see, the spurious pole is a two-dimensional subspace, right? So if I draw it as a one-dimensional section, then I cannot draw the spurious pole position on that. Right? To draw a two-dimensional 2, I need at least a two-dimensional space. Right? That's the reason I have drawn it as a two-dimensional subspace, two-dimensional space. Right? So that the geometric picture is clear.
So I'm going to use the fact that you can only allow 2G and that corresponding to that element will be 0.
No, it will not give 0. I'll write down what it is. Right? It's not 0 because omega doesn't have a 0 here. So what we want to do is to integrate over C of omega 6G minus 6 plus 2M plus 2.
What is the yellow line on the B?
This is the projection of this on MGM, right? So this both B and B tilde, B prime, are basically pull back. So B tilde is a coord, so you can think of this as being leveled by the coordinates B tilde, coordinates on B tilde. So to draw this circle on MGM, right? So these are points in PGM, and you can always project it down to MGM, right?
Yeah, but that will be just 1 point now.
1 point, no.
No.
Why 1 point? Because this thing isn't projected now.
This circle or the,
This circle.
but then there will be 2 points, like many points in fact. At each point there will be many Zi and Z1s, right?
Yes, so all of those Z1s, right, project onto the same point on the base, right? That's a distinction between this vertical section, right? See, normally the part of this will project down to the whole of MCN. I mean the total dimension of the space on which, if you take some segment of this, right, it will project down to 6G minus 6 plus 2M plus 2N dimensional subspace of this, right? Except the cylinder. Because the cylinder is going vertically up, one of the directions of the cylinder is just a tangent, that this tangent vector is moving only in the fiber direction. That's why the projection of the cylinder on MGMN is one dimension less. That's why it looks like a curve instead of a two-dimensional substance. Right? Again, this is projected onto in the interior. Okay. So this integral has a factor structure that we can, the way we can do the integral is that we take point by point on the base and first carry out integration over this direction, the Z1 direction. Okay. So suppose Z1 is equal to Z1 hat at the bottom. and Z1 tilde at the top. These could be functions coordinate on B tilde.
Bottom you mean on this one, I mean on the circle boundary of
On this, yes. On this B. So B and B prime, right? Or maybe I can say B hat and B tilde. It will make it clear. Okay. The Z1 value is here. The Z1 value here is Z1 hat. Here it's Z1 tilde. Okay. And there is no reason why the Z1 value has to be the same everywhere. Okay. In fact, it doesn't make sense, right? Because these are, as you move in this direction, it doesn't make sense to say whether the Z1 is the same or not. Okay. So that's why this Z1 hat and Z1 tilde could be functions of the coordinate on the base. Okay, will not make a difference. But let's first try to do the vertical integration. Okay, the Z1 direction. Now for that, what we have to do? We have to look inside omega and identify the part of omega which has a dz1. Right? If you have to integrate over the z1 direction, see that's the tangent vector, right? So you have to find a contraction of omega with del del z1 to be able to integrate over this vertical cylinder. In other words, to get a non-zero answer of omega g when integrated over this cylinder, we have to take the contribution to omega that is proportional to dz1. Is that clear? See, let's imagine that there is a surface, right? One of the tangent vectors of the surface is purely along x1 direction. Okay? So unless you pick, omega may have many components, right? dx1 is dx2, dx1 is dx3, dx2 is dx3, but dx2 is dx3 part will not contribute to the integral, right? If you have one of the tangent vectors directed along x1. So similarly here, because one of the tangent vectors is directed along z1, we have to pick the d1 component of omega. Is this clear? Yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So for fixed, the point is for a fixed value, fixed point here. So you go up from here to here, right? This is z1 tilde, this is z1 hat. When you go from here to here, you again do this integral first.
No, I'm saying at each point of this B, the value is Z1. Each point of B, the value is Z1.
Not necessarily the same. Because I don't draw it, I have drawn it as parallel to the base. But in general, it's OAB.
Yeah, but this case.
Yeah, in this case, it looks the same in this coordinate system, but that's completely artificial.
Yeah, because here you have drawn it parallel.
Yeah, I've drawn it parallel, but in general, it will OAB, right? And the Z1 hat here will be varying, Z1 tilde here will be varying in general.
On the top of the cylinder, you have
I've drawn it vertical, but it's not necessary. You could have, I mean, a cylinder could be a complicated shape like this, here and here, right? I mean, the cylinder could be like this.
So all you want this is to go.
Yeah, so all I need is that the spurious pole goes up the vertical. Okay, I still have to explain why this delta. Okay, that will be clear.
So, you, one of the properties of omega,
Yes.
where you told that a transformation that must be along easy integration, I want to
Yes.
that should give omega p equal to easy.
That should give you 0.
No, this one the concept.
What is the equation?
Omega p equal to is 3 conditions.
This is reparameterization of the sector. It's not movement of the fiber. We are not reparameterizing anything, right? See, that was in the context of when you are trying to reparameterize the local coordinate system on each coordinate. This is actually genuine motion in the fiber direction, right? So it's certainly not going to be zero. In fact, we wrote down what it is, right? So what is the part of omega that is proportional to dz1. In fact, there is only one source of dz1, if you remember, because in the definition of omega p, it has a correlation function of various things, and it has a product of x of zi minus del xi of zi dzi. Okay, wedge product, in the sense of wedge product, and then various other things. Okay. So this is the source of dz1. Okay. So this means that if we want to get a non-zero answer from this, you can divide this integral into two parts. Okay, one is the integration over, say, the base, right? The base coordinate. Let me call it by labeled by b field. Okay, this is a pullback of the
Normally,
one.
you see
Pardon?
the cap of the cylinder, that boundary is also called B tilde, and the projection on the base also B tilde.
Oh, so this is something else. So let's call it b bar. Okay. This part is actually not very relevant. I am just pulling the omega on the base. Okay. But what's important is that the integration over the c, this part involves just del xi z1 dz1. Is this clear? And you can see that there is no place, no other part of, once you have pulled out this minus del xi z1 dz1, nothing else depends on z1. Right? Because only z1 dependence was coming from this factor. Right? Once you have put the minus del xi z1 dz1, the x z1 has got disappeared. Right? You cannot also pick x z1. Okay, in that program. So we pick minus del xi z1 dz1, and then there is no, this part is completely independent of the z1 coordinate. So it can just come out of the C integral. Okay, that's the only important part of this argument. Okay, that the z1 dependence is here, okay, and then whatever is coming out here is independent of z1, and that's why I have taken it out of the integral for C. But this I can now write. So this is running from z1 hat to z1 tilde, right? Z1 tilde. So this I can write as I of z1 hat minus I of z1.
They don't hat of this coordinate, they don't hat of B bar. They don't hat also depends on.
Yes, exactly. So these depend on b bar. It is the, as you vary over the base, then the z1 hat could vary. Is this point clear? But the important point is that it only depends on two endpoints. Okay, going to do the integral.
You can. That is also V bar, coordinates on V bar.
Yes, so z1 hat is a function of b bar. Yeah, coordinates on b bar, right? So basically, after you have done this xi of z1 tilde minus xi of z1 hat, you integrate over this. Right? So because you have to integrate over the whole cylinder, right? You have done this part of the integral, and then you have to integrate over this.
Z1 is not a part of MGN, right?
Z1 is not part of, no, Z1 is not part of MGN, but once you have chosen this section, right, Z1 is a function of coordinates of MGN, right? Because you look at this picture, for any given point here, right, you go up and you Z1 hat by definition is this point, right? So corresponding to this point on MGN, right, the corresponding Z1 hat is this one, right? Because they are integrating over this base. See, I have introduced this B bar just so that I can pull back the whole omega on the B bar. Right? And I can think of this integration over the cylinder as an integration over B bar and then integration over the Z1. That integration is being done from Z1 hat to Z1 tilde, each of which are functions of the coordinate of the base. Because if you go to a different point here, right, on this B bar, you get a different Z1 hat and Z1 tilde.
So Z1 is a pullback on MGN.
Yeah, exactly. So you are pulling back Z1 hat and Z1 tilde on MGN. Okay. So now we see what is the final structure. Okay, the final structure of the correlation function that we are getting is that we will get a set of operators where xi is inserted here or xi is inserted here, but it has no knowledge about what happened in between. Right? Even though the spurious pole has passed through, it doesn't know about it.
Is this because omega doesn't have any leg in the direction of this line? Why is that?
Yeah, because I could do the Z1 integral without worrying about any other integrals going on at the same time. Right? This has to do with the fact that if we have integral a to b, the derivative of a function, then this function, it may have poles elsewhere, poles in the middle. This integral is independent of those poles. It doesn't get affected by those poles. So in a sense, this is the way we will define the integral over C. The integral over C will be defined as just xi of z tilde minus I of z hat. Okay, you can also think of this as, now you may worry that xi of z1 hat and xi of z1 tilde are not in the small Hilbert space, right? Okay, the difference of course is the small Hilbert space. Okay, so we can rewrite this as z hat to z tilde del xi of z dz. And the essential point that we are using here is that this integral that I have taken doesn't depend on the path that I take from z to z tilde. Okay, it's well defined because of this fact that this is a well defined expression. Okay, I didn't have to say anything about the path. This integral doesn't depend on the path, even though xi is not a physical operator in the small Hilbert space. This in fact is the crucial ingredient of this construction. If you recall, somebody asked during the discussion whether we could have thought about whether we can forgotten about xi altogether and use eta and del xi as independent variable, right? Or equivalently, we could have taken e to the q5, beta and gamma as independent variables. Right? You could certainly do that. You could write down all the correlation functions regarding e to the q5, beta and gamma. Okay? And you could define xi, del xi, by taking the beta of z with e to the phi of WOP. Right? Because beta after all is del xi e to the minus phi. Right? So if you take the OP of beta of z with e to the phi of W, you will recover your del xi. But from that definition, it will not at all be obvious that when you integrate del xi defined this way along a curve, the result is independent of the curve on which you integrate. It's not true for a generic dimension one current, right? If you take J of z with the dimension one current, you integrate it over various curves, you will get different answers because J of z has poles. Right? So yes, in fact, this result is even stronger. It's highly dependent on the torus. Right? On the torus, for example, or a generic genus in one surface, it doesn't depend on which cycle you integrate. Right? When you integrate from z hat to z tilde, right, you could go around different cycles of the torus. Okay, it would still give the same answer because this is periodic. This is all the periodicity property that the correlation function is supposed to have. So because of this, once you have taken this vertical cylinder, integral over this direction, okay, is completely well defined, and that's what you can use to define the integration over the cylinder C. Okay, because once you have written it as this difference, now there is no singularity anywhere. You can integrate over this and get the result for integration over the same.
So, suppose if this line was not there, so the sort of was not there, then we wouldn't have to do any of this. So,
Yes, that's right.
this description we are doing because there is this.
Yes, that's
Some
right.
information should be contained in ZP.
Well, you could still do this. I mean, nothing prevents you from doing this even when there is no codimension to singularity. Somewhere in the middle of the moduli space, you may decide that you want to go up for some reason.
Yes, but there it doesn't make any difference whether it can, whether it's like go, I will not take different answers.
Oh, you will get different answers because it's a different section altogether, right? It's a different generalized section, so the oscillatory amplitude will be different. Right? The onset amplitude will not be different. Right? By Stokes theorem. And the point is that the Stokes theorem applies irrespective of whether it's a regular section or not. Right? So this is after all a subspace of PGMN, right? And to apply Stokes theorem, that's all you need. Right? You don't need that it has to be a section, that it can have vertical parts like this. Right? Normal sections don't have vertical parts like this. Right? Because given a point on the base, right, there is a unique point in the fiber. That's how you define a section. Right? Here you see that's not true. Given this point in the base, there are many points on the fiber. Right? And that's what you are integrating. Right? So it's not a section in a usual sense. But for all the identities you have derived, right, we have never really used the fact that we need a section. Right? All you have used in applying the Stokes theorem is that we need a subspace of PGMN that we integrate. Right? A connected subspace. You shouldn't have gaps. Is this point clear? Now, you can think of it in this way, in the way I described, okay, that you have vertical segments on which you integrate. But you can also think of it in a different way. Okay, you can think of it that you will divide the moduli space into different regions, and on different regions you will choose different sections, okay, leaving some gaps. And whenever there is a gap, you have to add some correction term. And those correction terms are these integrals. Those correction terms are integrals of I of z1 f minus I of z1 tilde integrated over the boundary. Right? So here, over this b bar, you made a jump. Right? It failed to be a section over b bar. Right? I mean, outside it's a section, regular section. Inside it's a regular section. Over b bar, you made certain jumps in the fiber direction. Okay? So you integrate over outside in a regular fashion, you integrate over inside in a regular fashion, and over the base, over the this codimension one subspace, okay, you add a correction term. Okay, and that correction term is given the integral of omega p. Okay, so what is the correction term? Correction term is integral over b bar of omega tilde p. Omega tilde 6g minus 6 plus 2m plus 2n minus 1. Okay, plus we have lost one of the directions. And what is omega tilde? This is obtained from omega by dropping x of z1 minus delta of z1 is 0. Okay, and multiplying by, that's important, and multiplying by psi of z1 hat, psi of z1 hat minus psi of z1. Is this clear? Okay, so let me repeat again. So what you are supposed to do, in this region, you take the regular pullback of omega 6g minus 6 plus pm plus 12, okay, from PGMN onto MGMN by using the section. This part of the section S1. In the interior, you pull back omega 6g minus 6 plus pm plus 12 onto MGMA using this section. And then you add a correction term on the base. The correction term on the base is the pullback not of omega but of omega tilde using this part of the section. Okay, omega tilde has one less dimension. Sorry, not omega tilde. Omega tilde, of course, you can define omega tilde for all p. Okay, just like you define omega for all. Okay, but the particular degree that we need for integrating our base, okay, has one less degree because it's a one less dimensional subspace. Okay, and omega tilde is constructed simply by dropping this part from the definition of omega and putting back as I is of z1 at minus I. Is this clear?
So for this integral to be well defined, you have to make sure that the vertex operators don't come near to this particular range of z.
Yes. So the point is the vertex operators come near this particular range. Right? That's like collision of a picture changing operator to the vertex operator. That's also a spurious singularity from this perspective. Okay? You will avoid those by using exactly the same trick. Because the point is that from whatever you have done, you are not restricted to spurious singularities of this kind. Right? Anytime you find that there is a singularity in the integrand, which is not because of degeneration, you do this. Okay? You stop integrating outside a certain base and then go vertically up, go to a region where the spurious singularity has gone out, and then you fill the section. Right? And in general, because there are many chord samples, right? There is not one spurious singularity, there are many spurious singularities, right? So there you have many particle sections like this. Okay? In fact, we will give the general procedure next time, where you will basically triangulate the moduli space and use various sections in various parts and add corrections at boundaries.
Because the motion of this large number space, you won't have taken into the
Yeah, the point is, if we didn't know that the correlation function of psi in the large Hilbert space is a well-defined object, right? Which is equivalent to saying that if we didn't know the integral of del psi is independent of the path, we couldn't have calculated this. Right? And it's, as I said, it's very hard to understand the origin of this identity just from the beta gamma phi system. Right? If we had taken beta gamma and q phi as an independent variables, right? You could have defined that del psi by taking the OP of beta with e to the minus phi or e to the phi. But to prove from there that the del psi correlation function is independent of the path, right? There is a del psi integral, would have been very difficult because it's not derivative of anything, right? When you take the OP of beta of z with e to the minus phi of w, right? Nobody tells you that the product is derivative of anything. In fact, it's not derivative of anything in the small Hilbert space. So the crucial ingredient here is there is a large Hilbert space, right? And that there is a well-defined set of correlation functions for the large Hilbert space. Right? The only problem is that it has various poles, right? But this correlation function has all the correct periodicities and it's single value, and that's what we are using. This. So maybe I'll stop here and then.